if you are like me, you have obsessed over means and tools at some point in your life. And I think the best example for this is Linux in general. Because, I mean, Linux as an operating system is of course a tool, because computers are tools. And if you grow up in society, the only computers you have probably come in contact with are running like Microsoft Windows or Mac OS. So to use Linux is really, well, in and of itself kind of an anomaly, let's just say. And to come to the point where you actually like install it and use it and get to know it, especially like more advanced distros, it's kind of, well, not really an obsession, but kind of going down the rabbit hole. And yeah, if you clicked on this video, you probably use Linux, and you probably know this going down the rabbit hole. Maybe even like, maybe you started with like a more beginner-friendly distro, and then slowly but surely went down the rabbit hole of installing like maybe Arch or something, or even like something like Gentoo. So yeah, that is really an example of a tool where you kind of, where most people are kind of like, why would you do this? Why wouldn't you just use like Microsoft Windows and be done with it, whatever. Another example is programming in general, because I mean, programming is a tool, a skill, but it doesn't, like, you have to have an end to program something. Like there has to be a point, like something you want to achieve, of course. And again, programming is also a kind of rabbit hole. I mean, most people, like, they have nothing to do with programming, of course. I mean, they think, well, what will I program? I mean, all these programs and all the software. This is that's like written by like big corporations and big companies, like Microsoft Word, for example, or stuff like that, and it all kind of works, and it's good enough. Like, why bother? And I mean, another example is keyboards. Like, when we're talking about programming, of course you need some kind of input device, and keyboards are really another example of this kind of mindset of just thinking, well, it's good enough, whatever. Like the default option is good enough, and to like go beyond that, like to think, well, I mean, to even have the thought of, well, this keyboard is really inefficient, like this layout is inefficient, and in a sense not good for oneself. I mean, it's not like the normal horizontally staggered QWERTY layout is kind of, it's a historical artifact, and not something that's designed, like consciously designed for like human hands. And if you like want to go beyond that, you kind of have to go down again that rabbit hole, as with Linux and programming and, well, a lot of these examples. And I think what this all comes down to is that inefficiency makes us human in some sense. In the sense of, if you only ever choose the most efficient path, you really are sort of a boring person. At least in my experience, that is the case. Because you don't ever do anything like what you want to do. You only ever go the path of least resistance, or the path of efficiency, which is of course the path that most people go, because it's, well, the most efficient. And you don't ever like learn anything worthwhile, or just also create anything. Because I mean, creating something that doesn't like immediately give you some material, or brings you closer to some material end, for example money, is really inefficient, of course. And I think the stereotype that most exemplifies this idea of, well, always just doing the most efficient thing, and never like obsessing over, well, obsessing is kind of a strong term, but never like going down any rabbit hole of like even means and tools in general, whatever that would mean, not only in the context of computers, but I mean, that's what we're talking about here. It's like this kind of stereotype, like the like economic brat that that doesn't really do anything except like talk like about some nonsense and try to be important and this kind of stuff. So yeah, and I think it's important to not, I think one shouldn't strive to be like that, if you kind of get the stereotype. But I also want to talk about like creation and consumption in the context of means and tools, because it really, I think that is what it really comes down to, and that is also why I made the previous video about like why you shouldn't obsess over means and tools. Because if you take the examples I gave in the last video about like self-hosted services and Rising, for example, you can really see how that is in some sense an act of consumption, in some very abstract sense. Because I mean, I've given the example of, well, git clone and docker compose up. That's not kind of, you're not doing anything. I mean, yes, you're typing these things in your terminal and hitting enter and whatnot, but the actual setting up of the service you want to self-host is really an automatic process. So you hit these keys and put that in, and your computer does the thing, and then you have like some web service up and running, and you can navigate to it and whatnot, and then you can change the config and whatnot. But it's really, you're not really actively doing anything. I mean, sure, yeah, you're changing the config, and with Rising it's the same thing to some degree at least. You're changing a predefined config and putting in your I don't know, your name or the name of your service or whatever, or you're changing the border width in your desktop manager or whatnot. But it's really in a very confined confined border, if you want to think about it like that. Like the context you're doing this in is very confined, and it's very strictly limited and predefined, really. And with keyboards, it's kind of the same thing, and I think there's a big divide when it comes to like keyboards, or mechanical keyboards, I should rather say, because buying a mechanical keyboard is also, of course, an act of consumption. I mean, you are buying something, and it's really not about creating something. So yeah, this is the one side, and I think this is the trap that one shouldn't fall into when it comes to means and tools, because yeah, you're not really doing anything. I mean, you're going from if I can speak, you're going from one to one, really. You're not really going anywhere. And I mean, and again, the example I gave in the last video about like me setting up GitLab, I mean, this is not really, I'm not really learning anything by setting up a Docker service. Like, and it's very different with setting up something by hand, like actually configuring the database and pulling dependencies from like with Python pip or whatever. I mean, it's all still very you're kind of going by the manual and not really being creative. But you're at least learning something, and it's not just this git clone and docker compose up. So yeah, but if like this is really yeah, going from one to one. But when it comes to creating something, it's of course a very different thing. So you can of course program anything, but also self-hosted services, for example. When it comes to Rising, I mean, Rising, if it's about like actually creative output, it could be removing annoying stuff from your workflow. So, and this is really what sets you apart, or what sets one apart from this stereotype I showed earlier, who just lives with the annoying stuff in their workflow. Like if Microsoft Word has some annoying feature or annoying bug, they just kind of ignore it or try to like do their best or complain about it with their work, with their colleagues and whatnot, but they never try to change it because they are not in that kind of mindset where they can affect their tools and means and their life, really. But you can also, of course, create your own custom keyboard, or mechanical keyboard, rather. And this is, of course, an act of creation, and this is something very different than buying something, I think. But it also has to do, of course, with a certain kind of obsession. And this obsession really leads you to, yeah, like kind of, it's a driving force in learning anything new or in creating something. Like you kind of have to be, like you kind of have to have that in your, like an inner fire, you could say, like this kind of obsession. Well, I want to make it like that, and if if like my computer doesn't allow me to do that, I have to like kind of break out. I hope you're understanding what I'm getting at. It's also about like kind of control and freedom and all that stuff, which free software is of course about. So in this case, in like a creation, you are really going from 1 to 2, and this is of course the same thing I said in the last video, but it's kind of like from a different angle, because of course it's important to go from 1 to 2 in like an abstract sense. I hope you understand where I'm getting at. So of course you have to improve. If you only ever go from 0 to 1, you're kind of not getting anywhere worthwhile, or it's really something you're really kind of a flat personality if you want to take it like that. So again, if you ever go from 0 to 1 and never beyond that, you are not really going anywhere worthwhile, I think. So means can become an end, and this is what I said in the last video, really. So that often the means tend to become the end, and I think this goes hand in hand with like consumption, oftentimes. So again, setting up the 15th window manager is not really an act of creation. It's really just kind of going in circles. But also the means define the end, and this is, I think, a very important point, and also the point I want to make clear in this video, because of course means like of course you should obsess in some sense, in some obsess is maybe a too strong a word of that for that, but means are important, of course, and they do define the end. And I think the most extreme example of this in our time is of course AI. So if you use AI, you get AI slop. That's as simple as that. And with that, you really lose a lot of kind of space. If you want to think it like visually, you lose a lot of space when it comes to ends. So for example, you can't create anything personal with AI, like period. Whatever you create. I don't even want to call it create. Whatever you do, or whatever output you get from the AI can never be something personal, because I mean that's just not like, that's just how AI works. So it can never, or can only be like concrete to your concrete life to some certain extent. For example, I mean, of course you can let the AI write a letter and insert a name of I don't know, a friend or whatever, but I mean, is that really personal? Like no, of course not. And I think, and again, for like people like us, quote unquote, this may seem obvious with AI and all that stuff, but I think we need to go even further when thinking about this, because computers in general are also exactly the same thing. I mean, with computers you also have like a layer of kind of indirection. If you create something, or if you try to create something personal with computers, for example a card or whatever, a birthday card or whatnot, it's really, you always have this indirection, this layer of indirection, in the sense of you're putting something in the computer and you're getting something out, but the actual creation of that is like mechanical. Like again, birthday card example, you create a birthday card in Inkscape or whatnot and you print it out. I mean, the actual like putting the ink on the paper is a mechanical process. And there are certain limitations that come with that, of course. When in a, like, if you compare this to like actual like taking a pencil or pen and drawing something on paper, it's a very different thing. So yeah, I hope you understand, you kind of catch my drift with this. So, and these 2 points do go hand in hand. I mean, there are certain things where you shouldn't obsess over means and tools, but there are certain other aspects where you absolutely need to well, create anything worthwhile, really, I think. So another example in my from my life would be typography. Like, I'm not like super into typography, but there have been like days where I've spent like a large chunk of my day just like researching and reading about and like learning about typography and all that stuff. And it's really like, I mean, you could say, well, who cares? Most people don't know anything about it anyways. Like, no one cares. Everyone does it like this way and whatnot. But that goes back to the kind of picture I showed earlier, where you kind of, if you don't care about anything, if you only ever use like the raw, like the raw, most efficient means to an end, it's kind of, you kind of end up in a bad place, I think, in an abstract sense, of course. So yeah, I think that's about it for this video. Again, I think these 2 points go hand in hand, like not obsessing over means in some aspects, and completely obsessing over them in other aspects. And yeah, so oh yeah, and also there have been people who commented on the last video about exactly that, and I also want to say, like, of course I'm happy to to go down these rabbit holes and obsessing over means, like, but I think or I hope that was clear also in the last video, that I don't want to condone it. I mean, if I would like if my viewpoint was that obsessing over means and ends is always wrong and you should never do it, I mean, I would just use AI, I would just use Microsoft Windows and whatnot, I would just use Word and Photoshop and like all this kind of stuff. I wouldn't really care about free software and all that. I would use Facebook and social media and this kind of stuff, but I don't, of course. Like, because the means are important, and they do define where you, like, what kind of end you can reach. All right, so I hope this wasn't too rambly and you kind of got my point. And yeah, have a nice day.